Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet after graduating college. Customer service during the day at a telecommunications company and bartending on weekends. That's how I met him at the bar where I worked. He seemed charming at first, always tipping well and making conversation during slow nights. We started dating and I quickly realized I'd made a huge mistake. No job, no car, still living in his childhood bedroom at 32. He spent his days playing video games and complaining about how unfair life was. When I suggested he apply for jobs or maybe take some classes, he'd get defensive and say I didn't understand his situation. The final straw came when he asked me to lend him money for the third time in a month. I told him I couldn't keep supporting someone who had no intention of supporting himself. He threw a tantrum like a child. So I ended things right there. Clean break, or so I thought. 2 weeks later, I was home after a long shift, finally relaxing with some leftover pizza and a Netflix series I've been trying to catch up on. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Usually I let those go to voicemail, but something made me answer. The man on the other end asked if I was the girl from downtown. I was confused and asked who he was. He told me that my boyfriend had given him my number and said I'd be interested in making some easy money that night. He explained that my ex had told him I charged $100 and that I was really good at what I did. The caller said he'd asked my ex multiple times if he was sure because it seemed too good to be true. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. The realization hit me immediately. I asked him to confirm that my boyfriend had given him my number. He said yes, describing my ex perfectly. Tall guy with dark hair who drove a beat-up Honda. He added that my ex had said I needed the cash and would definitely be up for it. Then he asked what I thought about meeting up. I hung up without another word. My hands were shaking with rage. That piece of garbage had given out my number to random men, advertising me like some kind of prostitute. I paced around my apartment, trying to decide whether to call him and scream or just block his number entirely. I chose to ignore it, hoping it was just one angry moment of stupidity on his part. The next night, my phone rang again. Different number. An elderly man's voice came through the speaker. He called me sweetie and said he'd gotten my number from a friend of a friend. He explained that this person had said I might be available that night for some company. The old man mentioned he was lonely and had $50 in cash. My blood boiled. Not only was my ex still giving out my number, but apparently he'd lowered my supposed rate. I hung up on the old creep and immediately started plotting revenge. I spent the next hour thinking about all the ways I could get back at him. I could post his number online with embarrassing messages. I could sign him up for spam calls. But then I remembered something that would really hit him where it hurt. His ego and his laziness. I downloaded a dating app and created a profile using photos I still had of him from when we dated. For the bio, I wrote something that would attract exactly the kind of attention he wouldn't want. The profile described him as a successful businessman looking to spoil the right woman. It claimed money was no object and that he loved taking care of someone special. The bio said he owned multiple properties and invested in the stock market. It mentioned he was looking for someone who needed financial support in exchange for companionship and that he believed in treating women like queens with plenty of cash to prove it. The profile encouraged women to message him if they were interested in the finer things in life. Then I added his phone number and a link to his social media accounts. Within an hour, the fake profile had dozens of matches and messages. Women were sending photos, asking about his income and wanting to meet up immediately. I didn't respond to any of them, figuring they'd move on to calling or texting him directly when they didn't hear back. The next few days were quiet. I almost forgot about the whole thing until curiosity got the better of me. I called his number from a work phone to see if he'd answer. An automated message told me the number had been changed or disconnected. I started laughing. I checked his social media accounts and found they'd all been deleted or deactivated. The dating profile was still getting messages from women asking where he'd gone and why he wasn't responding. A mutual friend later told me he'd been getting calls and messages at all hours from women wanting to meet his supposed successful businessman persona. Apparently, some of them had even shown up at his parents' house looking for him. His mom had to explain to several confused women that her son was unemployed and lived in their basement. He'd been forced to change his phone number, delete all his social media, and apparently had a very awkward conversation with his parents about why random women kept showing up at their door asking about his supposed wealth. Was it petty? Absolutely. Was it probably crossing some lines? Definitely. Do I regret it? Not even a little bit. My younger brother has autism, so I learned early that people are just people, no matter their differences. In high school, I took American Sign Language classes because they seemed useful and interesting. I never knew those classes would matter so much later. When I started college, I felt nervous about making friends and fitting in like most freshmen. During my second week, I noticed a deaf student in my psychology class. He sat toward the front with an interpreter, and while everyone was polite to him, I could tell he was isolated. People would smile and nod when he looked their way, but nobody really tried to interact with him. I felt bad watching him eat lunch alone or walk to class by himself. After a few weeks, I worked up the courage to approach him. My signing was rusty, but I managed to introduce myself and ask how he was liking the class. His face lit up when I started signing. It was like watching someone who had been holding their breath finally get to breathe. We started hanging out regularly. He helped me practice my signing and I helped him with reading assignments that were harder to follow as the interpreter. We had the same sense of humor and both loved horror movies. Within a month, we were texting constantly and meeting up for coffee between classes. My signing improved fast. Having daily conversations with someone fluent made all the difference. Last week, he was watching me sign and told me I should start taking formal American Sign Language classes again because I was getting really good. I jokingly told him that he was my teacher now. I left right after I signed it, thinking he'd find it funny too. Instead, his expression changed completely. He looked hurt and told me he wasn't my personal tutor. I apologized right away and explained that it was supposed to be a joke. I told him I didn't mean it like that at all. He said it didn't feel like a joke to him. I apologized again and said my signing probably made it come across wrong, that I was trying to be playful, not dismissive. He looked at me for a moment, then his shoulders relaxed. He apologized too and said he shouldn't have assumed the worst, that he knew I wasn't like that. Things were weird between us for a couple of days after that. He was still friendly, but more reserved. I felt terrible about the whole thing. By this week, though, everything was back to normal. We were joking around and planning to see a new movie together. Today I was sitting in the student center when my friend from high school came over. We'd known each other for years but weren't super close. He asked me if everything was okay because he noticed that me and the deaf guy hadn't been hanging out as much lately. I told him we had a little misunderstanding last week, but not to worry because we were completely fine now. He said something about there being truth in every joke. I laughed uncomfortably, not sure what he meant. Then he said he knew I wouldn't hang with a guy like that for no reason. I asked him what that was supposed to mean. He told me to come on, that it was obvious I was getting something out of it. I said that was such a rude thing to say, and that my friend was someone I liked as a person. He said he was just saying what everyone was thinking and that it was the truth. I called him a bigoted jerk and said he was being ableist. That hit a nerve. His face flushed red and he said I wasn't one to talk. He told me I was worse than him and that I was taking advantage of a disabled guy and using him for my own benefit. I asked if he was serious. He said I was using my friend to learn sign language for free instead of paying for classes. I told him that wasn't why we were friends, and he knew it. He asked if I would still hang out with my friend if he couldn't sign. I said of course I would because we had tons in common. He told me to name one thing besides sign language. I listed off how we both love horror movies, we're both psychology majors, we both hate the cafeteria food, and we both stay up too late watching shows. I asked if I should keep going. He said whatever, and that I was still using my friend. At this point, other people in the student center were starting to stare. I was getting angry. but I also noticed my deaf friend walking toward us. He could see something was wrong. He asked what was happening and said I looked upset. I quickly signed what had been said. His expression darkened as I translated. My high school friend said great. Now I was probably telling lies about what he said. My deaf friend stepped closer to him and spoke clearly while I interpreted. He said he understood enough of what was said because he reads lips pretty well. The color drained from my high school friend's face. My deaf friend told him that I wasn't using him for anything and that we were friends because we enjoyed each other's company. He said that even if I was just practicing sign language with him, that would be fine too because deaf people help hearing people learn all the time. He called it community. He told my high school friend that since he seemed to think friendship required payment, maybe he should know that I tutor him in psychology and help him with reading assignments that are difficult to follow through an interpreter. He said if anyone was getting used, it was probably me. My high school friend said he didn't know about that. My deaf friend told him that, of course, he didn't know because he made assumptions about both of us without bothering to learn anything real. My friend turned to me and said that next time someone had a problem with our friendship, maybe I shouldn't waste my time explaining myself. He said people who think like that aren't worth convincing. He was right. My high school friend mumbled something that might have been an apology and walked away quickly. I got into astronomy when I was 12. My dad bought me my first telescope for my birthday that year. I spent every clear night in our backyard learning about constellations and planets. Over the years, I saved money from part-time jobs to upgrade my equipment. By 25, I had decent equipment worth about $3,000. My friend and I planned the stargazing session for weeks. Saturn would be visible that night, and the weather forecast showed clear skies. We set up everything in my front yard around 9 p.m. The front yard had better visibility toward the east where Saturn would appear. I lived in this same house my entire life. My parents bought it when they moved here from California in the early 90s, a few years before I was born. Most neighbors are cool and mind their own business. We had been out there for maybe 30 minutes when this woman I'd never seen before walked across the street. She looked like she was in her 50s with short blonde hair and wearing a robe over her pajamas. She walked toward us quickly. The woman demanded to know what we thought we were doing. I told her we were just looking at Saturn through my telescope because it was a clear night. She told me not to lie to her because she knew what that thing really was. My friend and I looked at each other confused. The telescope was obviously a telescope. It had the brand name right on the side. My friend tried to explain that it was just a telescope and we were looking at planets. The woman said it wasn't a telescope but some kind of surveillance equipment. She said she had been watching us for the past half hour pointing that thing all around the sky. I explained that's what you do with telescopes. You point them at different objects in space. She said she wasn't born yesterday and knew spy equipment when she saw it. She accused us of trying to hack into satellites. This was getting weird. I tried to stay calm and told her I could show her what we were looking at. I explained that Saturn was right there and you could see the rings clearly that night. She refused to fall for my tricks. She said people like me shouldn't have access to equipment like this. When I asked what she meant by people like me, she told me I knew exactly what she meant. She said this was America and we didn't need foreigners pointing spy devices at government satellites. My friend stepped closer to me. We both realized this was about to get ugly. My friend said we should go inside. I told the woman I was born in this house and was as American as anyone else in the neighborhood. She said with my face, she didn't think so. She was looking at me like I was some kind of terrorist. My parents are both American, but my dad's family came from Lebanon 3 generations ago. I have darker hair and olive skin, but I've never left this country except for one vacation to Canada when I was 15. I told her she needed to leave my property. She said she wasn't going anywhere until I packed up the spy equipment. I said it wasn't spy equipment but a telescope I bought from a store. She said we would see about that. Before either of us could react, she grabbed the telescope and shoved it hard. The whole thing toppled over and crashed onto the concrete driveway. I heard glass breaking and metal scraping. I asked what was wrong with her. My friend told me to call the police. The woman told us to go ahead and call them because she was doing her patriotic duty, protecting the neighborhood from terrorists. My friend was already dialing 911 while I looked at my destroyed telescope. The main lens was completely shattered, and the mount was bent. This wasn't something that could be repaired. I told her she had just destroyed $3,000 worth of equipment. She said good, and maybe next time I would think twice before trying to spy on American satellites. The whole situation was insane. I was standing in my own front yard on property my family had owned for over 30 years, being called a terrorist by some random woman who thought telescopes were spy equipment. My friend told me the police were on their way. The woman said perfect because when they got there, she would tell them all about my spy operation. I told her she was out of her mind. She said she knew what she saw and that thing was pointed directly at military satellites. I explained that Saturn was not a military satellite but a planet. She told me not to try to confuse her with technical jargon. When the police showed up about 10 minutes later, the woman ran over to their car before they got out. She told the officers thank God they were here because these two had been running some kind of surveillance operation in the neighborhood. The two cops looked tired. It was probably close to 10 p.m. by then. One officer asked what seemed to be the problem. I explained that this woman had just destroyed my telescope and was claiming I was some kind of spy. The woman said it wasn't a telescope but surveillance equipment disguised as a telescope. The second officer asked the woman to show them this equipment. I pointed to the broken telescope on the ground and explained that was my telescope until she pushed it over and broke it. The first officer asked who I was. I told him I lived here and this was my house. I showed them my driver's license with my address on it. The second officer asked how long I had lived there. I said my whole life, 25 years. The woman said that was impossible and told them to look at me because I was obviously not from here. The first officer asked the woman where she lived. She said she was visiting her sister who lived 2 streets over, but that didn't matter because this was about national security. The second officer asked her to explain why she thought this telescope was surveillance equipment. She said because I was pointing it at the sky where all the satellites were. The first officer asked me what I was looking at. I told him Saturn, and before that we had looked at the moon and Jupiter. My friend backed me up and said he was there the whole time. He explained we had been planning this for weeks because Saturn was supposed to be visible that night. The second officer asked the woman if she had any evidence that this was anything other than stargazing. She told them to just look at my face because people who looked like me didn't just own telescopes. Both officers looked at each other. I could tell they were getting annoyed. The first officer told the woman she couldn't destroy someone's property based on assumptions about their appearance. She said this was ridiculous because she was trying to protect the country and they were taking my side because of political correctness. The second officer pointed out that she had admitted to destroying my property, which was vandalism. She argued it wasn't vandalism when it was national security. The first officer told her she was going to need to come with them. That's when the woman lost it. She asked if they were kidding her. She said she was a tax-paying American citizen and they were arresting her instead of the actual terrorist. The second officer told her to turn around and put her hands behind her back. She said this was insane and demanded to speak to their supervisor. She demanded to speak to someone who cared about American security. The first officer told her she had the right to remain silent. She said she would not remain silent while foreign spies operated in American neighborhoods. They had to drag her to the police car while she yelled about immigrants and terrorists and government conspiracies. The neighbors started coming out of their houses to see what was happening. The woman kept yelling that this was what was wrong with America. They arrest patriots and protect terrorists. The second officer continued reading her rights, telling her anything she said could be used against her in court. She wanted everyone to know that the police were protecting terrorists instead of Americans. After they got her in the car, one of the officers came back to talk to us. The first officer asked if I wanted to press charges for the property damage. I said absolutely. My friend asked how much the telescope was worth. I told him about $3,000. The officer said they would need me to come down to the station tomorrow to file a formal complaint and to get some estimates for replacement costs. I asked if she would face any punishment. The officer explained she could be charged with vandalism, trespassing, and harassment. He said she would definitely be spending the night in jail. When they drove away with the woman still yelling from the back seat, my friend and I just stood there looking at my destroyed telescope. My friend said that was crazy. I said I couldn't believe someone thought telescopes were spy equipment. My friend pointed out the racism was obvious. I agreed and said 3 generations of my family had lived in this house and she thought I was a foreign spy. We spent another 20 minutes cleaning up the broken pieces of my telescope. Some neighbors came over to apologize for what happened and to ask if we were okay. Nobody had ever seen that woman before. The next day I filed all the paperwork and got estimates for replacing my equipment. The woman ended up being charged with criminal mischief and trespassing. She had to pay restitution for the full replacement cost of the telescope plus court fees. I grew up in the foster care system and moved out when I turned 18. Money's tight, but I'm making it work. My cousin lives across town in one of the nicer neighborhoods. We don't see each other much, but when we do, it usually ends in some kind of argument. She's always had everything handed to her, and I guess she doesn't really understand what it's like to struggle. That night, we got into it over something stupid. She made some comment about how I should just ask my parents for help with tuition, completely forgetting that I've been in the system since I was 12. I couldn't stay there another minute, so I grabbed my jacket and left. It was already past 11 p.m., but I didn't care. I needed to get home and cool off. The walk usually takes about 30 minutes, and most of it goes through quiet residential streets before you hit the area near my place, which is pretty isolated. The first part of the walk was fine. A few cars passed by. Some porch lights were still on, typical small town stuff. But once I got past the main neighborhoods, it got darker and quieter. There's this stretch where there are barely any houses, just empty lots and some old trees. I'd walked it plenty of times before and never had any problems. I was about halfway through this area when I saw someone walking toward me. Just a guy, nothing unusual about that. He passed by me without saying anything, and I kept walking. But then I heard footsteps behind me, getting closer. The guy called out to me, asking me to wait up. I turned around and he was right there, way too close for comfort. I asked him what he wanted while taking a few steps to the side, trying to put some distance between us. He told me he wanted to ask for my phone number. When I asked him why, he said he thought I was pretty and wanted us to hang out sometimes. The whole thing felt off. I mean, who approaches a stranger walking alone at night and asks for their number? I'm not saying I'm hideous, but I'm definitely not the type of person who gets random guys chasing after me on the street. I told him sorry, but I don't give my number to random guys I meet on the street. He said his name was Kyle, like that was supposed to change everything. I told him that didn't make any difference and that I wouldn't give him my number. I started walking away, but he followed me. He kept pleading with me, saying he was a great guy, and I just needed to give him a chance. I was already tired and angry from the fight with my cousin, and now I had to deal with this garbage. That's when I decided to flip the script on him. If he wanted to make me uncomfortable, I could return the favor. I turned around and looked him straight in the eye. I told him to please leave me alone because I had just gotten out of jail a few days ago and didn't want to go back again. I could see him starting to get freaked out, but he was still curious enough to ask why I had been in jail. I told him that my ex-boyfriend found out I gave him a disease, and he got so mad that he started beating me. So I grabbed a fork and gouged his eye out. Then I was arrested and sentenced to 2 years in prison, and I got out a few days ago. But I wasn't done yet. I told him in the most cheerful voice I could manage that I hadn't noticed before, but he had such pretty eyes. I said we should go to my house so I could see them better. I said it like I was talking about the weather. Then I grabbed his arm and started pulling him toward my direction. He started saying he had to go home, but I asked him what was wrong since he had wanted to hang out with me. I kept pulling on his arm, and he was starting to panic. He said he really needed to get going, but I told him we were just getting to know each other and that my house wasn't far. That's when he completely lost it. He pushed me away and started running, but I wasn't about to let him off that easy. I chased after him, yelling his name at the top of my lungs, asking where he was going. The guy was booking it like his life depended on it. He was stumbling over his own feet, looking back every few seconds to see if I was still following him. I kept up the chase for about a block, still shouting his name before I saw him disappear around a corner. Once he was out of sight, I stopped running and headed straight home. The adrenaline was pumping through my system, but when I got inside and locked the door, reality hit me. I realized just how dangerous that situation could have been. What if he had been carrying something? What if he had gotten aggressive when I refused? What if my little performance had backfired? I sat on my couch for a while thinking about what had just happened. Part of me felt proud that I had turned the tables on him, but another part of me was scared about how close I had come to being in real trouble. Walking alone at night was something I did regularly, and I had never really thought about how vulnerable that made me. The next morning I called my cousin to apologize for storming out. During our conversation I mentioned what had happened on my walk home. She was horrified and insisted on picking me up whenever I visited from then on. I didn't argue with her. A few days later I was at work when one of my co-workers mentioned that some guy had been asking around town about a crazy girl who chased him down the street. Kyle had been telling anyone who would listen about his encounter with a psycho who just got out of prison. The story had gotten more dramatic with each telling. I still walk that route sometimes, but I'm more careful now. I carry my keys between my fingers and keep my phone ready to call for help. I'd been married for a few years when my wife's grandfather passed away. Her grandmother decided to move from Florida to our state to be closer to family. When she was 82 and living alone, we all knew she needed help. My wife and I live about 20 minutes from her parents, so we started a routine. Every weekend, we'd drive over to check on Grandma, bring her groceries, help with doctor appointments, whatever she needed. My wife's parents did most of the work during the week since they lived closer. Her brother and his girlfriend helped whenever they could. It wasn't easy. Grandma had good days and bad days. Some days she'd be sharp as a tack, telling us stories about when my wife's mom was little. Other days she'd forget where she was or ask when her husband was coming home. We all loved her, and she'd taken care of the family for decades. It was our turn. My wife has several aunts and uncles scattered around the country, but most lived far away. A few would visit once or twice a year, which made sense given the distance. But one aunt, let's call her Karen, lived only about 4 hours away in the same state. She never came. Not once in 2 years. The only contact Karen had with Grandma were phone calls every few months. From what Grandma would tell us afterward, these calls were mostly Karen complaining about her job, her neighbors, her health problems. She'd talk for an hour about herself and barely ask how Grandma was doing. My wife tried to stay positive about it, but I could tell it bothered her. She'd make excuses for Karen, saying maybe she was just busy or that everyone grieves differently. When your own mother is declining and you can't be bothered to drive 4 hours to see her, that's not grief. That's selfishness. 3 weeks ago, Grandma passed away, peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was going to be held back in Florida, where she'd be buried next to her husband. The whole family made the trip down. The service was beautiful. The funeral home did a lovely job and Grandma looked peaceful in her favorite blue dress. She was wearing several pieces of jewelry, including her wedding ring, a pearl necklace, and 3 other rings she'd always worn. These were pieces that had been in the family for years. My wife's Aunt Sarah gave a moving speech about Grandma's life. She talked about what a wonderful mother and grandmother she was, how she'd always put family first. Then Sarah did something that caught me off guard. She started thanking people by name. Sarah thanked my wife's parents for opening their home and hearts these past 2 years. She thanked my wife and me for being there every weekend without fail. She thanked my wife's brother and his girlfriend for all their visits and help. She said we'd all shown what family really means. I felt proud hearing that. We'd all worked hard to make Grandma's last 2 years comfortable and full of love. But I noticed Karen's face getting redder by the minute. She was sitting in the back, arms crossed, looking like she'd swallowed something sour. After the service, before they moved Grandma to the cemetery, the funeral director removed the jewelry she wouldn't be buried with. This included 4 rings, 2 simple gold bands, 1 with a small diamond, and 1 antique piece with an emerald that had belonged to Grandma's mother. My mother-in-law walked over to Karen with the rings. She told Karen that these had been her mother's rings and offered to let Karen pick two of them to keep as a remembrance. Karen's eyes lit up like she'd won the lottery. Without hesitation, she grabbed all four rings and shoved them in her purse. My mother-in-law had to remind Karen that she'd said to pick two rings and that other family members should have a chance to have something too. Karen argued back that she should get them all because she was Grandma's daughter. My mother-in-law pointed out that they were all her children and the ring should be shared among everyone. Karen got defensive and said that we'd all gotten to spend time with Grandma these past 2 years, so the rings were all she was getting. My wife stepped forward and I could see she was trying to stay calm. She told Karen that we'd spend time with Grandma because we cared for her and that Karen could have visited too. Karen snapped back that she was busy and had a life and couldn't just drop everything like the rest of us. The whole family was staring now. Even some of the other funeral guests had turned to look. My father-in-law, who's usually the most laid-back guy in the world, walked over. He told Karen to give back two of those rings and that this wasn't up for discussion. Karen huffed and said fine, but she wanted everyone to know she thought this was unfair. She made a huge show of digging through her purse, sighing and acting like she was being tortured. She pulled out the two gold bands and practically threw them at my mother-in-law. That wasn't the end of it. When we were walking to our cars to head to the cemetery, Karen cornered my wife. She complained that she couldn't believe Sarah didn't thank her in the speech, saying she was Grandma's daughter too. My wife asked what exactly Karen thought she should have been thanked for. Karen said for caring and for being Grandma's daughter. My wife pointed out that Sarah had thanked people who were actually there and actually helped. She asked Karen when the last time was that she'd seen Grandma in person. Karen thought for a moment, and I could see the gears turning. She said that wasn't the point, and that she'd loved Grandma just as much as anyone. My wife told her that love isn't just a feeling, it's action and showing up. My wife walked away, and I followed her. But I wasn't done with Karen yet. I've been biting my tongue for 2 years, but this was it. I stopped Karen and asked if I could ask her something. When she said yes, I asked whether, in those phone calls with Grandma, she'd ever asked if Grandma needed anything, or if she'd ever offered to visit. Karen stammered that she'd assumed the rest of us had it handled. I told her that we did have it handled because someone had to, but that Grandma was her mother. I explained that Grandma had spent the last 2 years of her life wondering why Karen never came to see her. Karen's face went white. I continued, telling her that every time we visited, Grandma would ask about Karen. She'd wonder if Karen was okay or if she was mad at her. I told Karen that Grandma blamed herself for Karen not visiting. Karen said that wasn't what she'd intended and that she didn't know Grandma felt that way. I told her that now she did. The next day, we found out from my wife's uncle that Karen had been calling family members, complaining about how unfairly she'd been treated at the funeral. She was telling people that the rest of us had kept Grandma away from her and was painting herself as the victim. Here's where karma stepped in. My wife's cousin, who Karen had called to complain to, happened to be a regular on social media. She posted a long message about the importance of showing up for family while they're alive, not just at funerals. She didn't mention Karen by name, but she included photos of all our visits with Grandma over the past 2 years. The photos told the whole story. Birthday celebrations, holiday dinners, random Sunday visits, doctor appointments, grocery runs. Hundreds of photos spanning 2 years. Karen wasn't in a single one. The post got shared by dozens of family members and friends. Comments poured in from people thanking us for taking care of Grandma and expressing disappointment in family members who only show up when it's convenient. Karen called my wife 2 days later, furious about the social media post. But my wife was done. She told Karen that if she was embarrassed by her absence, that was on her. We weren't going to pretend she was there when she wasn't. Karen said we were making her look bad. My wife told her that Karen had made herself look bad, and we just weren't going to lie to cover for her. Karen hung up. We haven't heard from her since, and honestly, that's fine with us. The rings she took are probably sitting in a jewelry box somewhere, but the rest of us have something better. We have 2 years of memories, of time well spent, of showing up when it mattered. Grandma always used to say that family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.